Good morning, Vietnam. Back again already. This is going to be the second part of my analysing and critiquing of Dr. Gabor Maté. The first one was a little long because I had a long introduction. Of course, I won't be doing that now because everything I've said in that introduction applies to this one, except the subtitle I'm calling it Dr. Gabor Maté, Where Are You Leading Us, Part 2. And the subheading is Miles from Nowhere. So, this video is the first one that I found, not that I looked too hard in all these videos, but it introduces the concept of scars, S-C-A-R-S, scars, to represent how I assume he's referring to our brain gets scars within it caused by childhood trauma. So, this particular video is called The Root Cause of Trauma and Why You Feel Lost in Life. Excuse me. With Jay Shetty, the name of the interviewer. Excuse me. He starts with, today I'm talking with Gabor Maté, a celebrated speaker and best-selling author, and so forth and so forth. And he says right at the last sentence, we also exchange thoughts on dealing with grief, how we struggle to identify with the people we look up to, and how childhood experience varies for every child, even when they are raised in a similar environment. That is true. Our parents all have favourites. Excuse me. Itchy nose. And they treat each child differently. Now, I don't know about families that have 10 kids. What a disaster that is. How can you get love from your parent when there's 10 kids trying to get the same love? So, again, the transcript, I have had to repair the grammar, make it readable, lucid, intelligible, because his train of thought goes off the rails many times. And it's free-flowing, and I have to correct quite a bit of it, especially the grammar, and to make it so you can read it. So, here we go. And the interviewer says, how do you define trauma? Excuse me. Trauma is a wound that is not fully healed, which can be triggered at any point in our life. So it matters that we are able to find common ground and stay firm in what can give us healing, emotional stability, and happiness. All perfectly logical and very well said. We go on. So how do you define trauma? And why is it so misunderstood even though it's so widespread? Well, as I said in the first video I made on this topic, because one reason is childhood trauma is just individual. So how can it be? It can be fully understood generally speaking, but each one of us has gone through, can be a similar trauma, like getting beat up by your parents, your mother trying to tell you not to be a wussy and be a man at 5 years old. But we all react differently. So, here's Dr. Mate's answer. It's a deep question because on the one hand, it promises sometimes you somewhat loosely and promiscuously to refer to things that are not traumatic. So people will have a different experience. I don't know why he even talks this way sometimes. I mean, he's already gone off the deep end right at the beginning. quoting him, to say I was traumatized, no, they weren't. They just had a difficult experience. And this is one of my colleagues' points. All trauma is stressful, but not every stress is traumatic. I think it's, again, playing with semantics. Trauma is stressful. That's why it's called trauma. The thing is a trauma that occurred today. Did you have a car accident? That's trauma. It's traumatic. Did your girlfriend leave you? Did your dog die? It's traumatic. But childhood trauma is something that happened when you were a child. You can absorb the trauma that you have experienced today. You can deal with it. Your brain's developed. It's emotionally developed. It's psychologically developed. You have learned many things. You've learned how to cope with good things, bad things, indifferent things. But as a 5-year-old, as a 2-year-old, you cannot. It is severely traumatic. I go on. The question is it a current trauma or historic? I'm being picky, but he's already trying to suck people into his terminology, making trauma out now as a common word. Well, very rarely I use trauma in a sentence when I'm talking to my friends, unless people really want to talk about why they are not dealing with life, why they're unhappy, how can I make my life better? Anyway, he goes on, and then it is not understood nearly enough or used nearly enough so that, to my mind, a lot of conditions of mind and body are actually very much trauma-related. Not everything. Without the healing profession particularly, the medical profession actually recognizing it. A little bit of mumbo-jumbo, but again, not, as I just mentioned, that not all trauma can be everlastingly traumatic. You can deal with trauma as an adult 1,000,000 times better than when you're 2 years old. He goes on, again losing it in my opinion. So trombadan it comes in a Greek word for wounding drum. Is a wound, it's a psychic wound that leaves a scar. So his train of thought is just gone. It leaves an imprint in your nervous system, in your body, in your psyche, and then shows up in multiple ways that are not helpful to you later on. Well, that is true. Again, in my opinion, childhood trauma can be in any part of your body, in fact. And I mentioned in a later video that my best friend in the US in the 80s died of cancer, and I think his parents beating him up regularly created that weakness in his whole system, psychic, physical, mental, his personal development. And similarly, we had a lot of similarities, but I thought I would grow much taller. My dad is 2 inches taller than me, but I didn't. And my friend was actually shorter than I, like 3 inches, but he had longer arms than me. So the traumatic experience he got from his parents really stinted his growth, and I believe caused the cancer later in his life. He died at 45 or 46. So he goes on, whether it's physical or mental trauma. Yes, childhood trauma can affect us in any way, in any part of your body, and your body remembers it, whether it's just your thoughts, but your body definitely remembers every time you were traumatized as a child. It is not understood nearly enough or used nearly enough. I don't know about used, but anyway, so that to my mind, a lot of conditions of mind and body are actually very much trauma related. True. Without the Oh, sorry, go on. So, in its basic sense, trauma, which I think you mean childhood trauma, is a psychic wound. And if you look at the nature of a wound, on the one hand, if it's raw and open, it really hurts. So when somebody touches that wound that you sustained a long time ago, but it hasn't healed, yet you react like you're just being tormented all over again. This is a very interesting paragraph. I write, I guess this is the closest he gets to answering the question, but the answer is not fully correct. Your reaction to the trauma can be painful, but also it can simply be confusion, or you are unable to process a reaction to or for a certain event. So you can have a traumatic experience in the present. It can be traumatic in the present, but it can also trigger, it may also trigger a traumatic experience in the past. And this is one of the difficult things I have also been through, is how to distinguish between the two. Normally for me it's been, did I resolve this problem, this traumatic experience? Or is it still lingering? Did I dream about it? Did I think about it the next day, and so forth? If it doesn't leave me, I find that it's generally a past traumatic experience, maybe only, but in a combination it can be as well. Now when I say this is the closest he gets to answer, it is, what is childhood trauma? He goes on, this happens in relationships all the time. On the other hand, wounds scar over, and the scar tissue has certain features. It is very hard, it's rigid, so it's not flexible. So people tend to be rigid when they are traumatized. Excuse me. It also doesn't grow, so trauma very often stops emotional growth and development. It also, as I discussed at least briefly before, it does stop physical growth and development, and can cause a lot of physical damage to your body, which then can, 40 years later, it can manifest or come out of your body as cancer. In all the videos I've watched, I wrote this long paragraph. This is the first time he has talked about trauma like this, using scars as representing childhood trauma, and how the imprint in your body is like a scar. Now he gets into his theory more deeply, what he believes how trauma is processed in your body, how it is processed in your body. But you can have many different types of traumatic experiences. One would be very rare, to have only one traumatic experience. Our parents were not perfect in many areas. Obviously, they were carrying their own traumatic experiences. Excuse me. And their treatment of their children also varied, whether one child, two child, or did they abuse them in more than one way? Now, I don't mean beating them up. You can be abused emotionally in many different ways. It can stop emotional growth depending on the severity and your own personal psychological capacity and resilience. He goes on, talks about the scar a lot. It lacks sensation because scar tissue doesn't have nerve endings. The trauma then, just to finish, is not what happened to you. So trauma is not the difficult incidents. Like trauma is not the war. It's not in my case, the Second World War. How he makes that connection is beyond me. When I was born, or what happened to me, drama is not the abuse that people experience. Drama is not the pain that they felt. trauma. It is a wound that is sustained as a result. So the term wasn't, for example, the sexual abuse somebody called Thomas experienced. It was a wound that the person sustained as a result of having been abused. Yes, that wound is what's called trauma. Emotional, abusive trauma. Now, it can be physical, but you're absorbing it all as emotional in what I will repeat again and again is my parents don't love me. That's the good news, because it was promised, the wound that we sustain, it can be healed at any time. Yeah, but how? Hello? Wow, this sounds so convoluted. This is part of his theory on childhood trauma and how it affects our mental health in the past, the present, and the future, of course. But no solution. He goes on about his age and how... Now he goes on... Sorry, I need to read this. If trauma is what happened to me 75 or 78 years ago, it happened. It never not will have happened. So he's saying because he was born in the last year of the war, he was traumatized. Okay. Or, no, sorry. What happened to him, it comes out later in one of the videos. Anyway. But then he goes on about India, the country India. You know, the partition of India wounded a lot of people, but it never would. It'll never not have happened. But if the wound is what happened, the people inside, or the wound inside, I assume, is a result that it can be healed. That's probably the best differentiator that I've heard, and you're right. It is good news because it means we can't heal it exactly. Well, we're never going to heal it with your advice, Dr. Mate, because you have no solution. What do you think of the biggest going the opposite way? We're talking about a wound, and I want to come back to that by going the opposite way. And I write, this is just mumbo jumbo. He must be very tired. He has given a number of interviews, too many on this topic. And then the moderator, the person asks him, how is healing defined? So he goes on about language and how different countries have a similar word for health, and in the last sentence, now what trauma does is it disconnects us. It splits us off from our true self and disconnects us from our emotions. I don't think that's what trauma is, and I've already said enough about that. I write, this is totally unintelligible. How does it relate to healing? He goes on, even from our bodies, so that if that disconnection is the essence of trauma, then the healing is that coming together of the self to become whole again. Healing is often used synonymously with cure. Yes, but how? The solution. Fair enough, but strangely enough, in my view, and not just in my view, people can be cured from an illness without becoming whole. Well, look. Is the illness the trauma, and is the whole resolving parts of it, all of it? I don't know. Without healing, people sometimes also become healed without being cured. Whatever. What is he talking about? I'll only read the first sentence, then forget the rest of it. Paragraph. So in essence, healing is not the absence of a physical illness, but it's the integrity of a person who is no longer split off on themselves. As I've mentioned, childhood traumatic experience can make you sick, very, very sick the next day, 40 years later. You just don't know how your psychic, your body has absorbed that traumatic stress and how you have dealt with it growing up. choosing for me like the wrong partner so many times. I mean, it could easily have led me to going crazy, doing really harmful things to myself, taking too many drugs. But it did not, and I still have the capacity. I'm 72 years old. I don't think I'm going to die of cancer, but I do have a lot of issues which I'll go into later. So, right, like that's a whole cliche. You know, he's starting to talk about time and how long it takes to heal. It won't. Yeah, right. So let's go back to the wound and talk about, is there any relationship between time and the wounds, or unhealed wounds and what? I write, of course, time does heal some wounds. The loss of a family member, failing to get into medical school. Just not deep traumatic childhood experience. But traumas experienced in the present can be healed by various methods and time. I mean, time does heal some early traumatic experiences and current traumatic experiences. But he goes on, time itself does not heal emotional wounds. Now, I assume he means deep traumatic childhood wounds. What is that relationship? How is that wound being formed internally? As you said, trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you. He says this all the time, in every video. I think this is true. What happens is that it maybe lies dormant for a long time and then something occurs that it touches. It is when we talk about people being triggered, for example. Something touches, I presume he means the scar, who will do one inside you and you react. Well, I guess he means that something touches you, like an experience that touches your scar, and that internally you end up reacting to it. He goes on, you've just been wounded for the first time, and certainly I can tell you that's been the case for me. Well, I think we got lost whether he's talking about early childhood experiences or he's talking about something that just happened that has triggered your childhood experience. Then he goes on about his marriage. Maybe scars it over time. Maybe makes it less available to immediate memory. But should something happen to evoke it, it's going to show up in its full painful impact until you do some work to heal. Yes, we know. You haven't told us how to heal. Time by itself does not heal. Okay. And then he starts talking about being safe and feeling safe. So I believe, and I'm hypothetically saying this, I believe that I'm right in my opinion because what makes me feel safe and secure, but often to unearth a wound. We have to be okay with the vulnerability of saying, well, maybe I'm not right. Maybe this response is coming from some wound that I gained in the past. That is all 100% correct. And that's why I'm saying that his theory, basically, he got from primal therapy theory, because that's exactly what it says. But the whole beginning of that paragraph is all totally incoherent. And in the next paragraph too, I've left it in to show that he just meanders a lot. He talks about irrelevant things and he's trying to connect these dots that don't connect. And as I write, he has no idea how illogical and idiotic most of this sounds. He goes on, but when we do that, we stop growing everything. In nature, It only grows where it's vulnerable. So a crustacean animal like a crab is inside a hard shell, so it can't grow anymore. But that's what the crab is. That is its size. Humans grow to a certain height, a certain width, a certain weight. It can't grow anymore. So the crab, or whoever he's talking about now, it has to mold and make itself very vulnerable. What's the connection? The crab has got the hard shell. How is it vulnerable? That's how it developed over thousands of years. He goes on, to be able to grow a tree doesn't grow where it's hard and thick, does it? It grows where it's soft and green and vulnerable. Well, I think the first part of soft is that the ground is, and I guess it grows where the branches don't develop bark, so it can grow green foliage. The vulnerability is absolutely essential for growth. And for vulnerability, you've got to let go of those defenses, such as being right, that you developed as a child in order to protect yourself from the pain. So that's why we talk about growing pains, because vulnerability is necessary for growth. Without vulnerability, there is no growth. What a lot of shit. I mean, the stupidity of that state, that whole two almost paragraph. You're a child. You're 2 years old, 6 years old, 10 years old. You're totally vulnerable. There's nothing else. You're only vulnerable. You can't protect yourself. The crab can protect itself. It's got the hard shell. The tree grows. It's got the bark. It's hard to cut down. It's hard for insects or whatever, birds to destroy. Even fire doesn't destroy a lot of it. You're totally vulnerable. That's what being a child is. Such as being right that you developed as a child in order to protect yourself from the pain. What the stupidity of that statement. And then we talk about growing pains. Well, getting beat up every day is not growing pains, it's just getting beat up every day. And I've written, what a lot of crap. Now he's starting to sound like a yoga mystic or a Sufi teacher. Now I've skipped over about 8 items that they talk about, that I've listed as the headings for the discussion. But one of them is, in the 44th minute, no two children have the same childhood. This is really, really interesting, and I've mentioned that a little bit already, that every childhood, even within a family, will experience childhood trauma. Of course, sometimes they can be, for example, beaten up at the same time, but their experience from it can be totally different, and how they react as an adult can also be completely different. But there was a study done, which I found, and it's titled, and I've included it right here, One Twin Was Hurt, the other was not. Their adult mental health diverged. A large study of discordant twins, in which only one suffered abuse or neglect, adds to evidence linking childhood trauma to adult illness. I've talked about this quite a lot already, but here is a study that clearly has shown that even twins raised in the same family, and if I remember the study, that even where the twins were abused, got some traumatic experience, they reacted differently to it as they grew up and as adults. It's a very interesting study. I highly recommend to read it. As I write, this has always been a connection, causation for me. And as I've already mentioned, my best friend died of cancer. He was very healthy. He ate well. He exercised. But the pain inside him was just too enormous. He also went and did primal therapy. And he told me a few times how his parents used to hold his arms when he was young and just beat him up. So then there's a few more topics they discuss. But one of the things Mate talks about, and I'm nearly to the end of the video, is he talks about indigenous peoples. He said that he visited some indigenous locations and tribes in Canada, and he has given some talks there. So I'll quote a little bit of what he said. Follow your own traditions. Acknowledge your own suffering. You need to acknowledge your own pain. There are dances, chanting, sweat lodges, drumming. And I write, wisdom to heal. Yeah, okay. By sweating. Sweating is just another form of suppression of your deep, hurtful feelings, misdirecting the pain because you're feeling so good from the sweating. So you can't fight, so you can fight another day in pain. I mean, that's what taking drugs is. You know, these guys go out party. You know, I've done it. And you feel good for a few hours, come home, sleep, and you, oh, I woke up, I'm good for another day. I remember in my second year out of university, I had a really good job. It was boring as dog shit, but anyway. But I started smoking a little bit of dope every day for like 6 months. I mean, what was it? It's just coping mechanism. I mean, you know, taking a sweat lodge or dancing and so forth. I mean, I did the same things. Here I write again, he has become the new guru for all tribes on the planet, whether Western, Indigenous, Alaskan, American Indian, Canadian Indian, whoever. He is the expert. You know, become whole again. Do some chanting. Of course, that's all they know. They're not going to go see a psychologist, psychiatrist. They're not going to read the Primal Scream or books like that. Naturally, we in the Western world do not believe we can heal this way. We go to a psychiatrist. So, I finish. His notoriety, expertise and fame from his work on addiction has suddenly made him feel that he can become an expert on this topic. He's not an expert on childhood trauma, outside of his work on helping drug addicts. He did conclude that child abuse was the main reason for drug addiction. I have read In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, and it was a great, great book. And I've heard him lecture on this topic in LA about 25 years ago. I continue. He has no educational experience, expertise outside of his own personal traumatic experience, of which we all have. Every person on this planet has had some form of childhood trauma. But to what degree does it manifest itself in your adult choices in life, and your behavior and your mental health and your physical health? Are you aware how your childhood trauma is affecting your life? How has it controlled you? How has it affected you? How do you help people with this trauma and to control or contain it in all its manifestations in everyday life? Well, good luck to you. As I said, I found my way. You need to find your own. This is the end of the second part. And I'll either attach the script or add it as another video. Thanks so much. See you in the next one.